car crashes, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts with the attorneys of Hollis, Wright.
Welcome to the Attorneys. I'm Art Franklin. Thanks so much for joining us. On this edition of the Attorneys, we're going to address a very fundamental and very powerful issue, your civil rights. But before we get started, I want to remind you that we have lawyers standing by right now at Hollis Wright who will take your call. That number is 1-844-LAW-TALK. It is a free and confidential call. You can make that call right now so they can get to whatever question that you may have. Carter Clay is at Hollis Wright right now. Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you, Art. Hope you're doing well.
Doing very well. Good to see you.
Great topic tonight.
It is.
Very interesting. We don't do this a lot on the show, but we're going to be breaking down civil rights litigation, civil rights law. That's really kind of a broad topic with a lot of subheadings and sub-legal topics underneath it. And I can think of no better guest than my old-time friend, Hikel Brooks, who's here with us here this evening to break this topic down. Hikel, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Carter. Happy to be here.
Well, great. Well, tell us a little bit about your law practice and how you got involved in handling civil rights type cases.
Well, once out of law school, came back, my aunt had an attorney in Birmingham that she wanted me to connect with, well, while I was in law school. And so I clerked for him during the summers. It was a civil rights firm, and so my practice grew from that.
Yeah. When we talk about civil rights, what types of legal subjects are we talking about that would fall under that sort of broad umbrella of civil rights?
Probably too many to discuss today, but in terms of what I actually handle, we handle police excessive force, we handle employment discrimination, and kind of other constitutional issues that might be related to criminal law, which would involve motions to suppress.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about all of those topics
Sure.
here this evening. We're going to kind of unpack that a little bit. When we talk about police excessive force, that's the same thing as police brutality cases,
It is.
right? So we've seen a lot of that on the news over the last several years. Those situations and incidents tend to get highlighted and brought about in the news media and kind of criticized and talked about. And I always like to say this when we talk about these subjects, and Art, you'll appreciate this as well. This is not a show about being critical of police officers. I love police officers. We all need police officers to help serve and protect us in our community. But like lawyers who make mistakes, doctors who make mistakes, engineers that make mistakes, police officers make mistakes as well. And one of the mistakes that happens from time to time is they sort of abuse their authority or abuse their power in situations and incidents kind of go too far. And when we talk about excessive police force cases, can you expand upon that just a little bit? What are we talking about?
Really, one of the key issues, or at least legal issues, in these excessive force cases is the concept of qualified immunity. And what qualified immunity is basically a shield for any governmental official, which would include police officers. And basically what that shield says is, if I've done something, if I've acted reasonably, if I've acted in a way that doesn't violate someone's constitutional rights, Fourth Amendment right to unlawful search and seizure, if I haven't done that, then I shouldn't be sued. If I made a mistake, now, if there's reason to believe that the average police officer would not have acted in that way,
right,
then that probably puts you outside of qualified immunity, and therefore it was excessive. Just kind of imagine two police officers showing up at a store where they think there had been an armed robbery. Well, everybody's going to be keyed up, everybody's going to be excited, the adrenaline's going to be running. And then when they get there, there's no one who has a gun, and one police officer shoots and one officer doesn't. On its face, it suggests it was unreasonable to shoot because you had two police officers facing the exact same set of circumstances. No one's armed. Why pull the trigger?
Right, right.
So
Yeah, in our world, we talk about mistakes equating to negligence.
Right.
Unreasonable conduct. And the fundamental philosophy, as I understand it, behind the qualified immunity is, look, these people are out putting their lives at risk. They're serving and protecting. They're involved in all of these dangerous activities. A lot of people are not going to want to do that type of work if they don't enjoy some type of immunity from lawsuit.
Correct.
However, the way I because this is a very complicated area of law when you can start diving into all these immunity questions, but kind of the way I look at this immunity in our practice when we see it where you get police officers who get involved in motor vehicle accidents with people is that if the police officer simply engages in some type of negligent conduct or a mistake, then they're probably going to have some level, if not complete, immunity.
That is correct.
However, there is an exception to that involving what we call violations of policies, procedures, rules, and regulations, sort of a checklist. So in the example that you gave where somebody shows up, nobody has a gun, and the police officers start shooting somebody or shoots people, they probably violated some type of checklist item in their training. So talk about that a little bit more.
So all police officers have to go to the academy. They have to be licensed to be police officers, just like attorneys. We don't just go to law school. We have to take a bar exam. We have to be licensed to practice law. Well, same thing with police officers. They come out of the academy and they have a list of policies that they must abide by when they are handling any given situation, kind of standard operating procedures. Well, if they deviate from those, then they become less likely to be covered by qualified immunity because then they are not acting as a reasonable police officer. You mentioned it earlier. This is not to bash all police officers. You've got great plumbers, you've got bad plumbers, you've got great electricians, bad electricians. But the fact of the matter is, police are human too. And sometimes you have police officers who have issues going on in their lives, and then they just simply walk past their policies. And when they do, they're probably walking outside of the protective shield of qualified immunity.
Art, I want you to jump in on the conversation here, but one thing that's particularly important in this day and age, these officers are almost always wearing body cams right now. And so oftentimes there's not a lot of mystery in terms of what happened because you've got the body camera footage that shows exactly what happened, and of course that gets brought to light, kind of sensationalized, the media jumps on it and starts showing a lot of these videos and things, but a lot of times these cases are there and there's not a lot of mystery in terms of what happened.
Well, you guys are great legal minds over here as I've been listening to you guys discuss it. I'm gonna be like the person sitting at home on a sofa, don't know a whole lot about it legally, but when you see it on the surface, it seems like some of these cases are cut and dry, but they're a lot more complicated than what meets the eye, aren't they, High Carl?
Absolutely. And for example, there was a case, I believe, out of Carolina where the police officer actually cut off the volume of his camera. In other words, he wanted to have a side conversation with another police officer when they pulled someone over who was not drunk, but they yet arrested him for DUI. Well, we don't know, it gets cloudy, Art, when you cut those cameras off or you cut the audio off of your camera. So again, it's not as straightforward as it may sometimes seem.
But again, cutting that camera off or that audio, I guarantee you that violates a checklist item. It violates a policy and procedure not to do that. And clearly, I think the motivation would be there to perhaps have suppressed what was going on there.
That's right. It's about time for us to take a quick break. But we've got a lot to unpack as we're talking about your civil rights, and that's what High Call is here to talk about. I want to remind you, though, that you can get in contact with a lawyer at Hollis Wright right now. All you got to do is pick up the phone and dial 1-844-LAW-TALK. You get a free and confidential call for whatever you may want to ask there. We're going to take a break. We'll continue this discussion on the other side of this break. Stay with us. The Attorneys is back right after this.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm, and thank you for watching The Attorneys. We hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple: to provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free and off air. So if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury topics, call, email, or text us. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, or go to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us button. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us and watching The Attorneys.
The Attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you.
When we started the show in 2011, my goal was to do what our firm does best: help people answer questions related to real-world legal issues they have in their lives in a way that's not intimidating to talk with a lawyer. If the issue is important to you, it's equally important to us, and we're ready to talk with you at no cost.
Yeah, oftentimes people are confronting various legal issues in their lives that really run the gamut of a lot of different legal practice areas, such as bankruptcy, criminal law, civil law, such as personal injury, divorces, domestic relations. And to be able to have a show once a week that covers those practice areas and answers people's questions in those areas, that's really the main objective of the show.
We use the resources of the many lawyers at our law firm to create a plan that has a lasting impact for each person that calls or texts. And we also give back to the community at the same time. We are here to serve you, the viewer, each week on The Attorneys.
We hear all the time, hiring an attorney is intimidating and overwhelming. Well, at Hollis Wright, it's not. Trust me when I say our team is here to serve you, not the other way around. Let Hollis Wright tell your comeback story.
Welcome back to The Attorneys. So glad to have you with us. Our conversation on this episode is your civil rights. As we get back into that conversation, I want to remind you about that QR code you see on the screen. Go ahead, scan that QR code. That will get you in contact with someone at Hollis Wright. And Carter, I know we talked a lot about police brutality in that first segment, but there's so much for us to unpack when we talk about civil rights.
Yeah, we're going to shift gears here now and talk a little bit about employment discrimination. But obviously, if there's a viewer out there, family member, or maybe even themselves, they feel like they were a victim of police brutality, High Call Brooks is the guy that they should give a call to. He can explain to them their legal rights and explain to them whether they do or don't have a viable case. Employment discrimination, that's another area that you focus in your legal practice, is that right?
It is.
All right, talk a little bit about employment discrimination, because I think that there's probably some level of misconception about that area of the law, and I'll touch upon that as well, but kind of what is your thought on employment discrimination?
Okay, let's put aside class action cases, because that's a totally different conversation. Someone individually has been discriminated against, whether it's because of race, gender, national origin, disability, age, whatever protected group you're bringing your claim under. Typically, they start their claim with the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Okay.
All of this falls under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 requires within 6 months, 180 days, that you file that claim with the United States EEOC. They typically will do an investigation. Let me bag up. They actually will try to mediate these cases. They've been doing this for over a decade now. They try to mediate the case. If they can't get them mediated, they investigate them. And then ultimately, if they can't they don't want to continue the investigation because they've kind of gotten both sides and say he said, she said, that kind of thing. They'll issue what's called a notice of right to sue, and you'll have 90 days to file your lawsuit into federal court once you get that notice of right to sue. Now, that's just for most areas of discrimination. If it's race discrimination, that actually falls under 42 U.S.C. Section 1981, which is the Civil Rights Act of 1866. So we're talking about the oldest civil rights law, right after the 14th Amendment was passed, freeing slaves. So you can go directly into federal court if it's race discrimination.
Yeah. Now, this is one thing that I think is very important for people to understand, and this is where I think this misconception arises. The vast majority of employees out there are in an employee at will setting.
Correct.
Which means that your employer can fire you for whatever reason they want or no reason at all, and you can quit for whatever reason you want to quit, and you can go about your job. Unless you have a written contract for employment, you are going to be an employee at will. Now, there are exceptions to an employer discriminating against you and firing you if you are a member of a protected class, correct?
Or if you complain about discrimination toward a protected class.
But it has to relate to a protected class.
Absolutely.
Race, gender, those type, religion,
Absolutely.
Those types of things. So, for instance, I want to make sure that everybody understands this. Somebody saying that I'm discriminated against because my boss won't let me smoke cigarettes at my desk and so he fired me. You're not a member of a protected class. I'm sorry, they can fire you for that. If you decide that you think you need to go walk outside an hour every single day and your employer's mad at you because you're taking too much time walking, and you come back and say, well, I'm health conscious, I like to exercise. I'm sorry, you're not a member of a protected class. Am I correct?
That's absolutely right.
So you've got to fit it within one of those categories of discrimination, correct?
Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. And, you know, once you do that, once you make that initial complaint, and you are in federal court, for example, now though that case is going to be broken down to either one or two types of cases. Either direct evidence, which are the easier ones to win. You rarely get someone saying, hey, we got too many black people around here, we're about to fire as many black people as we can. Typically, you don't get that.
If you've got somebody that dumb, you probably don't want to be working for them anyway, right?
That's probably true. But most cases fall under what's called indirect evidence. There's a United States Supreme Court case, McDonnell Douglas versus Green, which kind of lays out, it's almost like a tennis match, if you would imagine it. The plaintiff who brings the claim has to produce what's called a prima facie case of discrimination. And if they do, they get to knock the ball over the net. Now, a prima facie case, for example, in a hiring case, is I'm a member of a protected class, I was qualified, I applied, I didn't get the job, and either it remained open or someone outside of my protected class got the job. That knocks the ball over the net. Then all the employer has to do is articulate. They don't have to prove anything. The burden of proof always remains with the plaintiff, the person bringing the claim. All they have to do is articulate a legitimate, non-discriminatory, non-retaliatory reason for why they did what they did.
Yeah.
That knocks the ball over the net. Now, at that point in time, it gets serious. It gets even more serious because now you've got to show pretext for unlawful discrimination or unlawful retaliation.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just wondering if those direct evidence cases pretty typical in the employment discrimination cases.
Well, in my experience, you can get some of those direct evidence cases in certain. You'll usually find them in certain categories, like the construction industry, where people are kind of used to being rough and tough about, you know, what they think about any and everything. And so there are some industries where you usually might get a direct evidence case.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I would imagine most cases are indirect evidence because nobody wants to go around and say, I'm a racist or I'm a sexist, or nobody wants to have that label put on them, even if they are in fact that person.
Yeah, and a different term to use for indirect is circumstantial evidence.
Correct.
So let's change the hypothetical that I used a minute ago, where let's say you've got an African American who's walking an hour every day while they're at work, and they get fired, right? And the employer says, well, I fired you because you walked an hour every single day. And his response is, yeah, I'm walking with 9 white people. They walk with me at the same time. Now, all of a sudden, you start to getting into what we call this pretextual excuse. This is just a bogus excuse because you allow everybody else in the office to do the same conduct I engaged in, yet I'm the only one that's African American. I'm the only one that got fired. These people continue to engage in that type of conduct.
Now, the place where people get tripped up in that example that you just gave is if it's two different supervisors involved. Because you could have two different supervisors. Well, I only supervise you. I don't supervise the other 9 white people that you, and if they were under my supervision, I would have terminated them. Yeah. And then your case gets dismissed on summary judgment.
Well, I know we got to go to break. We got rolling there with this discussion, but let's take a break and we'll come back with more.
We did, and we're rolling in some other places too that you can find Hollis Wright whenever you look. If you go to social media, go to X, go to Instagram, go to Facebook, go to YouTube. You'll find Hollis right there. Good information, a lot of good contact, a lot of things that we're doing outside of being on this show, but make sure you check us out there as well. We're going to take a break. We'll continue this discussion on your civil rights when we come back. Stay with us.
Thank you for watching The Attorneys each Sunday night, where we come to your living room to provide free legal advice in a confidential, off-air setting. Unfortunately, with the number of calls, texts, and emails that come in during the show, we can't always get to everything. But know this, Hollis Wright is open all week long. You call us at 844-LAW-TALK and we're going to answer your question for free. Thank you for watching The Attorneys, and we look forward to seeing you and talking to you soon. Hiring the right law firm may be the most important decision you make after an injury. Hollis Wright is built for that moment, built to take your case all the way and to restore you to you. Let Hollis Wright tell your comeback story.
Welcome back. You are watching The Attorneys. We're so glad that you stayed with us. And we want to remind you before we go, this is our last opportunity for you to go ahead and get in contact with someone at Hollis Wright, one of the lawyers standing by. They stand by throughout this show to take your calls at 1-844-LAW-TALK. It is a free and confidential call. We're talking your civil rights. Hi, Carl Brooks is with us. Very good conversation as we want to continue that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's continue to talk about employment discrimination. One of the things that I'm interested in is what types of evidence are you developing in these cases? How do you go about discovering evidence to help prove your case? What types of things are you looking for?
There are several ways. Typically, human intel is the most. In other words, I have a coworker who overheard someone say, were telling sexist jokes in the workplace. Sometimes you'll have some of the best evidence comes from someone who was in the clique of the decision makers, whoever the decision makers were. They were in that clique at one time, but they've left the employer. So now they don't feel obligated to protect someone who might be operating with an unlawful motive. Either they were terminated or they just decided they found a better opportunity for themselves. Those people are more willing to talk about what happened in your workplace. Emails, sometimes they're pictures, sometimes they're drawings on the walls where you have go ahead and take a picture of it. And sometimes there's audio recordings. We deal with that. And in the state of Alabama, I can surreptitiously record a conversation between you and I. What I could not do is secretly record a conversation between you and Art.
Right.
That would be unlawful.
As long as one party is a party to the conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of ways. And then documents themselves. I mean, if I'm going to show that I'm an exceptional employee and was terminated despite being an exceptional employee, there ought to be some document trail that will show it, whether it was annual reviews, whatever it might be. So sometimes these cases can be document intensive.
And how about like text messages? I would think text messages between people in the office would be a ripe area to explore.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, because I think this is one thing that the viewers need to understand, and why a lot of times these cases that you handle and that I handle take so long is you just don't get to walk into your former employers and access their computer systems and their text messages. You've got to make formal requests through the court process
Correct.
to get access to all of this. And I know that you get a lot of resistance from the employer and their attorney about producing this stuff, but talk about that process, the struggles that you have getting access to that information.
So anytime you file into court, there's this process called discovery. And if you are requesting information from the other party, it's typically through your interrogatories or request for production of document. Sometimes you have to go on site to actually view certain activity that took place that's related to the case. So you do get some employers, defendants in these cases that are just simply hesitant to respond. And so you just have to go through the process. You have to go through the process of contacting the attorney, trying to set something up, that failing, and then filing a motion to compel to get an order from the court.
You mentioned the EEOC at the outset of this discussion on this topic. What are the statute of limitations or time periods that would apply to either filing a claim with the EEOC or filing a claim in court? How does that work?
Okay, 180 days to file your claim.
With the EEOC?
With the EEOC. And then once you get that notice of right to sue, you've got 90 days to file in the federal court.
Now, I have heard, I don't handle this area of law, but I have heard that you have to wait sometimes, often a long period of time before the EEOC will provide that right to sue.
Yeah, because they're going through their normal investigation process, and you can imagine federal bureaucracy. There's sometimes there's sometimes a backlog of cases.
Yeah.
And now, Carl, I was wondering if you could talk about some of the constitutional law cases that you handle.
Yeah. One of the cases that I'm really proud of is I represented a family. They were originally from Cleveland, the Ruffin family, and they moved to Marshall County. They just wanted to get away from the city. And unfortunately, there's a group up there, the Alabama Empire Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, who thought they shouldn't have moved into that neighborhood. And one night they came and they burned a cross on their front lawn. And we were happy to be able to prosecute that matter from a civil side. And it was being handled also from a criminal side from the U.S. Department of Justice. So it was a good experience for me because I think I was a fairly young lawyer at the time. And just to see how you can be protected in the court system if you have a problem. It's just great. It was great to see.
Yeah, well, I'm at least glad that he clarified that when he was a young lawyer. I was hoping we were beyond the days of that type of activity occurring. Yeah. It does still occur from time to time, but I know that is something that you're very proud of. But thankfully, I shouldn't say thankfully, but at least it did happen many, many years ago.
It did.
Now, you also do a little bit of personal injury work. Is that right?
I do. You know, the regular car accident cases where somebody has been hit, and you know, we get out there and we represent those folks and try to give them the best product we can.
Well, great show. We really appreciate you having on tonight. Yeah. Employment discrimination, police brutality, general civil rights. Highcall Brooks is the person that the viewers would need to call. He's an outstanding attorney. I've known him for a long period of time. He will serve the client well.
So glad to have you on the show.
Thank you.
All right. And that wraps it up for us for this episode of The Attorneys. We want you to make sure you follow us on all social media platforms. And I talked about them earlier. Let me also throw in TikTok. We're there as well. You can find Hollis Wright wherever you look. Thanks for joining us for this episode. We'll see you back here next time.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.